Jim Crow laws came from the North. There's a common belief in the general public that because northern states legally ended slavery decades before the Civil War, their communities recognized the human rights of blacks. This is wrong. As the number of free blacks in the North increased, laws were put into place designed to exclude them from white society, or black codes. According to author of The Real Lincoln, Thomas DiLorenzo, quote, "So-called black codes existed in the North decades before such discriminatory laws were enacted in the South after Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877. The Revised Code of Indians, for example, prohibited Negroes and mulattoes from coming into the state. All contracts with Negroes were null and void. Any white person, such as an employer, who encouraged blacks to enter the state were subject to a fine of up to $500, which is over $17,000 in today's money. Negroes and mulattoes were not allowed to vote. No Negro or mulatto having even 1/8 part of Negro blood could legally marry a white person, an act punishable by 10 years in prison and a fine of up to $5,000, which is over $170,000 in today's money. Any person counseling or encouraging interracial marriage was subject to a fine of up to $1,000, over $34,000 in today's money. Negroes and mulattoes were forbidden from testifying in court against white people, from sending their children to public schools. A Quaker in Connecticut, Prudence Crandall, went to jail for educating black children, or from holding any political office, end quote. New Jersey and Connecticut amended their state constitutions to prevent blacks from voting in the 1840s. Between 1849 and 1857, Michigan, Iowa, and Wisconsin all rejected referenda which would allow blacks to vote, and so did New York as late as 1869, 4 years after the end of the Civil War. Indiana, Oregon, and Lincoln's home state, Illinois, with Lincoln's support, went as far as to amend their constitutions to prevent blacks from even living in or entering their borders. They also had laws that fined blacks up to $500 in today's money for gathering to dance. As of 1862, added in the Illinois state constitution was Amendment 18, which stated, quote, "No Negro or mulatto shall immigrate or settle in the state after the adoption of the Constitution," end quote. It was put up for a public vote and passed by a majority of over 100,000 votes. Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, California, Colorado, and New Mexico, all quote-unquote free states, passed similar laws in their constitutions. Blacks in the North were barred from owning property, becoming jurors, and even being buried in white cemeteries, where a number of black corpses were removed by grave robbers. They were whipped, imprisoned, and deported if they violated these rules. We're talking about free blacks in the North here, just as a reminder. Free blacks were assaulted and kidnapped, had their communities burned, and were overall terrorized by a New England group that preceded the Ku Klux Klan. In New York City, hatred of blacks spurred the deadliest mob violence in American history. On July 13th, 1863, poor white New Yorkers rioted in protest of the Emancipation Proclamation, which hypothetically freed slaves in Confederate territory only, and the new federal draft law, which would force whites to join the Union Army. That is, unless they could pay $300, which is $6,700 in today's money. Colonel Arthur Fremantle, British emissary to the Confederacy, was in New York City at the time on his way back to Great Britain, and he witnessed the riots. He later wrote in his memoirs, quote, "The reports of outrages, hangings, and murder were now most alarming. The terror and anxiety were universal. No colored man or woman was visible or safe in the streets, or even in his own dwelling," close quote. Describing the motivation for the racial attacks, he said, quote, "The people who can't pay $300 naturally hate being forced to fight in order to liberate the very race who they are most anxious should be slaves. It is their direct interest not only that all slaves should remain slaves, but that the free northern Negroes who compete with them for labor should be sent to the South also. Close quote. When Fremantle inquired of a bystander why blacks were being attacked, the bystander said, quote, "Oh, sir, they hate them here. They are the innocent cause of all these troubles." Close quote. The mob set fire to an orphanage for black children and, quote, began attacking black men and boys in the tenement district along the downtown waterfront. Close quote. One of the victims was a black man named William Jones, who was hanged and burned. The riot lasted 4 days, and 5 Union Army regiments were needed to quell the madness. Some estimate that up to 400 blacks were murdered, and a quarter of New York City's black population left homeless. Many others fled the city. Commenting on the inhumanity free blacks faced in the North, famous abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison said, quote, "The free colored people were looked upon as an inferior caste to whom their liberty was a curse, and their lot worse than that of the slaves." Close quote. That's right. A prominent abolitionist admitted, we have the quote, that black freemen in New England were even worse off than slaves in the South. Think about that for a second. Furthermore, the American Colonization Society, the organization that Lincoln was a leader of that aimed to deport all blacks from the U.S., was very active in the northern states. By 1861, 12,000 free blacks in the North were deported to Liberia, where most of them did not survive. Given these realities for blacks in the North, it should come as no surprise that the racist Jim Crow laws of the South were initially put in place by Reconstruction-era Northern Republican-controlled governments. Today, Northerners tend to blame slavery and Southern culture for the racism and deprivations that blacks continue to face in northern towns and cities, oblivious to the insidiousness of their own past. The fact that so many are unaware of this is just further proof that history is really written by the victors. All of this is to say that the northern states, during and before and even after the Civil War, were not racially tolerant. No. But Matt, if they weren't racially tolerant, then why did they free the slaves after the war? Good question. We'll get into that later in the series. Thanks for watching.